The recording is in progress. Why now Zoom has to say that, I don't know. Anyway, we're on the last Tuesday of May, which means we're finishing up the wisdom section, which has to do with discernment and judgment and following the holy voice within us, not just the little ego self-centered voice within us, right? And using discernment. And so wisdom goes with what other faculty? Who's it married to? This is your review.
Love.
Love, yes. And so the other ones are what? Faith and what?
Faith and will.
Faith and strength. And then
Oh,
will,
faith and strength. And then will
and will, evolutionary quality that goes with it is power. So in June, we're going to talk about personal power. So it's not ego-centered power. That would be more like forcing things. It would be about allowing our internal power, our spiritual power, to come together with our will. So that's what we're going to do, power in June. So wisdom is the evolutionary part that goes with strength and power. So it's really, really powerful when you think about that combination. And then after June, we will have finished the first triangle. And then we'll go into the second triangle, which is just fun. So discernment has to do with our wisdom. By being willing to be breathing and open and present so that we have more and more clarity about what we say yes to, what we say wait to, and what we say no to, right? And all the other variances in the middle, and trusting that. So the ways we trust this part of us, that part of us that's leading us by spiritual principles, is through confirming and verifying what our sense is, what our understanding is, and being able to like check things out. So if I get, oh, well, that sounds like a good thing. And then to check it out, okay, I have that hunch, I have that amount of discernment going on, and then playing it out a little bit to see what it is. So that's where journaling pays off a lot, and documenting it. Like sometimes I'll tell one of my friends something and I'll go, and you're my witness. And what that means is down the road, when it's confirmed or verified or not, there is a reliable place where that information came so that I can say, okay, that impression I had spiritually was on point, or maybe it was a little off. So the thing to understand is that when you're operating in these faculties and in these principles, it's not on the same thing as a linear time frame. So you might have an amazing revelation when you're meditating that just like blows your socks off. And your ego, your intellectual self, is going to try to wrap the story and put it in a linear two-dimensional timeline in order to make sense out of it. However, the message doesn't come in linear two-dimensional time. So it's really easy when you have a really sensitive, creative person who gets really powerful information, or they're meditating and they can just see things, they're just so amazing, that it feels often like, oh my, this is really big and I have to start right now, have to do it right now. And there's an urgency kind of feeling that goes with it often. And so part of our discernment, part of our wisdom is to realize that when we have spiritual understanding and things and information, and we're connected that way and we're discerning things, it doesn't necessarily follow the same two-dimensional timeline that our physical bodies are operating on. So we might think we need to do it right away, linear wise, and maybe it is urgent, and it may not need to be right away, linear timeline wise. So that's where a lot of our wisdom and discernment are. And that's how come it goes with love, because it's really about being in that spot of being okay with being in the flow and paying attention to the feedback you get from the world. Because if you push too hard and you follow that sense of urgency and you push too hard, it will either sabotage, blow up in your face, or it'll feel like you keep running into walls. Well, maybe it's because you're ahead of your time. And, you know, and I know I've had that, and you guys have all probably had that, where you have these great ideas, these great things, and then you go after it like there's no tomorrow, and then you just keep running into closed doors. And then a year later, 2 years later, it seems to open up. Well, because there's a time in there often. So to respect that and be okay with it and say, okay, there is a higher timing for everything. And just because my ego, that's not my amigo, says I have to do it right now, does not mean I do. It means I have to honor it. It means I have to understand, I have to go within and see how it lines up. But that doesn't mean I have to go out and seem like it's a big emergency. Follow me? Next month when we're doing the power part, it'll be really easy to start seeing how our spiritual will, that's different than willpower, and the authority or power that we're given goes together, because those things, it follows. If I'm discerning what's going on or what it is I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm also given this spiritual power and authority to do it. And so the big lessons are, how do you play it out in human form, in alignment with what you say you believe in? Because the integrity and alignment is key. That's why all these things are so important, is that we stay aligned and we stay in integrity. And so sometimes it takes a lot of education. Sometimes it takes talking to people. Sometimes it takes a lot of prayer and meditation and journaling to get to that place where the alignment has like a laser-like focus versus oh, that's a great idea. Okay. So wisdom, remember what color goes with wisdom? Do y'all remember?
No.
Green. Michelle has her mic off, but I can read her lips.
Green.
Green, a deep, beautiful green, right? Which is why being in nature really helps us with that. So did you all play with the color green during the week? Mm-hmm. And so share a little bit about what you noticed when you played with the color green.
It seemed happier.
Happier?
And people around me seemed happier.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
Beyond tapping into wisdom, it was like tapping into synchronicity, fun, innocence, and flow, natural flow. I would call that, in adult world, natural flow state.
Yeah. Cool. It's amazing how when you use colors like that with intention and you're paying attention, you can really see their influence, right? And so I remember working in a psychiatric emergency room, and they painted all of the colors of our walls pink, like a light pink and then dark pink trim, because somewhere there was research that said pink calmed us, and since it was a psychiatric emergency room, most people were agitated. They made the walls pink, so color does really affect us. I don't know if it really helped all the people coming in or not. Most of the guys who worked there didn't think it was fun having pink walls, but wasn't our decision. That's the way they did it. So do any of you have any questions about this wisdom part so far? Because one of the things I want to talk about today is how there's a great saboteur that tries to come in and usurp us. And I want to talk about how that works a little bit so that you can see it and discern it before any sabotage actually happens. But before we go there, does anybody have any questions about the wisdom part or anything you want to say about it before we go into this other piece? Because it really is, it came through the other day that, I need to kind of mention the other thing.
I need you to mention the other thing. I am in a deep state of need.
Okay. So I'll just dive right into it, because as a matter of fact, you kept coming to mind, Michelle. So what I want to talk about is the fact that within all of our human selves, like, you always hear you're in the world, not of the world. So you're a spiritual being hanging out in this human form. And the most difficult part for all of us who live by spiritual principles often is navigating the physical world. Like, I've been heard to say that the three-dimensional reality is highly overrated. I'd rather just be in prayer and meditation and hanging out with God. Like, what do I have to do this like linear time thing for? And it can create resentment sometimes. And it can create all kinds of discord. So the balance is being.
Diane, I need you to mute everybody because the feedback is causing an echo.
Got it. And Is that better now? Okay, so being in the world, not of the world, means that we are learning how to live by higher principles while in physical form. It's not one or the other. And you'll hear people say, oh, I'm working on my spiritual self, or oh, I'm working on my physical self. And the answer is both. Yeah, it's got to be both. Like they're harmonizing down the road together. And they're in tandem, whether somebody realizes it or not. So in human form, if we look at our lives and we can say, you know, we understand all these spiritual principles, we understand how to live, we get it. How come we keep messing it up? Or how come we go through these really big trials? Or how come things don't seem to line up? Or how comes, right? And there is a way that I, kind of an analogy that I use, a metaphor I use to help myself see those things before they grab me too hard. Because they used to grab me a lot. Now I kind of I get them to see them first. So if you think about these two little kids, they're say between 6 and 12, and they're within you. One of them is the wounded kid, the wounded child. You guys have heard of that. The wounded child is the part of us. Wound meaning pain is running that person, so to speak, that energy. And pain means separation from source, which means if we went through any kind of discord or pain or trauma or any time that we got separated, in quotes, humanly, from our source, meaning God. Okay. And so most adults walk around with some kind of wounds in there. And so part of our journey is to get back to the point where we're living so fully in God that that wounded little kid gets reunited with our adult self and doesn't act up anymore. Basically, I mean, this is very rudimentary, but you know where I'm going. Now there's another little kid in there that a lot of people don't talk about. The other little kid in there is the imagination kid. This is the kid that lives in fantasy world, like we're going to go to Disney every day, all the time, and everything should be whatever the little fantasy story is I tell myself it should be. And so when this little imaginary kid, the imaginational kid, and the wounded kid get together, the combination creates entitlement and resentment. And the entitlement shows up not always in the typical entitlement we see, like, oh, that kid's entitled or blah, blah, blah. It shows up with the belief of things should be somehow different than they are. Somehow better, different, more, something. It should not be this way. It needs to be this way over here. And that's a form of entitlement. And so if we let those little kids run rampant, okay, and we don't use our adult, because your adult self, your current present day 2021 adult self is where the healing happens. And the healing means that we get reconnected to our source and this discord doesn't have power anymore. That's what it means to be connected to our source. The discord doesn't have power. Can't run us anymore. So the 3-year-old kid or the 5-year-old kid might be having a temper tantrum, but my adult self can still stay centered. Okay, you with me? So one of the things that's so important is to realize that entitlement is, well, it shouldn't be this way, or how come it has to be this way, or I'm working too hard, or I don't really understand why, blah, blah, blah. All of that are these two kids sabotaging. And as long as those two kids are running the show, it's literally impossible to be authentically connected to another person with your integrity, right? It's impossible because the static is in there. And so that entitlement can show up in very subtle, very sneaky kind of ways. It doesn't always look like an acting out teenager. It can show up in the mindset or belief that, you know, whatever's happening shouldn't be happening, or I deserve better than this, or I deserve more than this, or blah, all those little things. Because they're really not little. It seems little, but it's not little. And so in order to allow all the spiritual principles to start coming together and working for us, you got to first of all understand that there's these players in there that like to have a field day, and they're in everybody. And yet it's your adult centered self that has the ability to say, talk to the hand, or here you have 10 minutes. Like one of the ways I handle it is I give myself 10 minutes a day from 10 in the morning to 10 in the morning. And you guys can chirp all you want to in there. You have 10 minutes, go. And then when 10 minutes is done, you don't get to talk the rest of the day. The adult running the show. And so if you can't fit it in the 10 minutes, too bad. If you miss the 10 minutes, oh well. It's kind of like you snooze, you lose. And so it's important to realize that our human autobiography plays a big role in all of these things, which is why I keep talking about checking things out, because our human biography, especially when we start really studying spiritual principles and understanding these things, like and more, because there's always more to understand, we're never done, then the human self is going to try to put some kind of framework around it, or it's going to try to make it manageable for itself in some certain way. And so that story that the human self tells is not always true or accurate. It's a story. Like, no, if you have a brilliant idea right now, you don't have to have it done by Friday. Not necessarily. And it's some of the stuff that comes through for us to do for our life's work. It's not they're not weekend projects. They're unfolding marriages of our physical human nature self and our spirit, which can take all kinds of interesting twists and turns based on how we're thinking and how connected we are. That's why pain means disconnection from our source, and our source is God. So when those two kids are running the show, that the wounded child and the child that's living in this imaginary fantasy world, like they want to be skipping on Main Street in Disney every day, when those two get together and they start doing the entitlement dance, the first consequence that happens is that person is disconnected from others. They can't receive love, can't give it, because there's a static in the way. Can't feel a part of a group because there's static in the way. And a lot of times it's unconscious. It's not because a person's necessarily doing anything wrong. That's where the wisdom comes to play, is like, ooh, it's time to grow to the next level and get more clear about this and get more aware that there's a part of me that has this entitlement little dance going on. It may not be the crazy entitlement that everyone's labeling that, and it's still a real thing. Because anytime we think something should be different than it is, then there's a level of entitlement in there, right? And so the antidote, or the way to handle it, is get more and more familiar and feeling the safety of surrender, of humanly surrendering into the flow of what's going on. And so surrender is a really big, deep process, because our ego, that's not our ego, wants to hold on and control and make it look a certain way and blah, 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 because that's what it does. But our spiritual self needs to start surrendering so our human self can relax a little. You know, like when you meditate and you're breathing and you finally surrender, you can finally exhale and your shoulders drop and you go, oh. And usually you start crying or close to it, because all that pain that's in there between these two after-outers, when you surrender, the pain gets released. Then the next step would be to bring the rectification or the healing, the reconnection to your source, and let that reconnection drive the bus, not the kids, because kids can't drive very well. They tend to wreck. And we've all done it. We've all done it when the kids are driving the bus and we've wrecked. We've even driven off cliffs in places where there's no cliffs. Right? So that the wisdom and the discernment happens with all of our different life experiences. And it's not a black or white, all or none at all thing. It's a progressive willingness to look at things and begin to see it. Now, those two kids that are acting up, if they're allowed to keep going down the road, the body bears the burden and the physical body begins to show signs of dis-ease, like arthritis, blood pressure, stuff like that, because it can't keep up the constant gookiness, right? So anything that's going on in physical form has a physical solution, but it also has a spiritual solution and an emotional solution and a mental solution. Like, what am I thinking? What are my belief systems about it? What thoughts are going through my head? Does everybody have a safe trip in my consciousness, or is it like a minefield in here? You know, am I beating myself up, or am I being kind? Where's my integrity level? Like all of those things, that's what the surrender is about, is really getting honest with ourselves on a deeper level about that part of it. So that then we can decide, use our wisdom to discern what and where to go next from a place of love. So if there's two motivators in the world, basically love and fear, right? I'm talking divine love, love or fear. So we want to use our wisdom to discern what's going on and make any change and surrender from a place of love. Love towards self, love, love, the agape love of the divine, not just like, oh, I love you, or I love tacos, right? Are you with me? So it's very easy. Well, no, not always easy. It's seductive is what it is to get caught in that trap of the imagination kid, getting the wounded kid going. And then when they collude, it can make things tricky. Because sometimes the entitlement, it's kind of, here's one of the ways you hear entitlement. In fact, I saw it on a Facebook post the other day. When somebody starts raising their voice and they say, this is my truth, I have to tell you my truth, and they're raising their voice, that's entitlement. Because there's the truth. But when somebody's saying it's my truth and they're angry and they're pushing, that's not in alignment with the divine, not from that space. That's not a place of surrender. That's not the place of being in integrity. So it shows up in things that appear to be spiritual. I call them pseudo-spiritual. They appear to be spiritual, but really, if you really look at what's going on underneath, it's not quite aligned. That's how come it takes progressive work and surrender and understanding and community, because there's no way for anybody to heal all of this stuff in isolation. So we live in a culture that says you got to heal it alone, or it's just between you and God. No other humans need to be involved. Not true again, because in human world, in spirit world, that's true, but in human world, we need other people. Because that's how the brain works. That's how the neurochemistry works. That's how the biology works. So that's how come sharing with trusted people or being in community where there's a standard and a way and an understanding, and we all can kind of learn it, whether we're being messy or we're on point or whatever it is, and we can kind of all kind of work it out together. That's what power is. So when we live by that belief system, many of us are taught that we have to do it on our own, by ourselves. Don't tell anyone whatever you do. That is a bold-faced lie that we're taught. And it's rooted in fear. And fear and faith can't coexist at the same time in your words and your actions. So either who's driving the bus? Your faith self, or that part of you that's running scared, knowingly or unknowingly. And sometimes it just jumps in and gets us. It's not about looking for where we're wrong or what's bad with us. It's not about that. It's about more and more awareness so that we can make a deeper and deeper commitment to expanding and growing in these areas, so that then our physical self aligns, because all real good change comes from the inside out, which means we get connected spiritually and we align our mind and our emotions and our spirit, and then physically in human form it comes out. Where in Western society sometimes people do the other way around, where all they want to do is external stuff, thinking that it changes the inside. It works, but it's the long way. And sometimes it never works because it gets stuck in the head and it never gets down into the heart and into the soul, And we want to have all of these involution and evolution spiritual principles working together for the greater good, humanly and spiritually, not one or the other. It's yes. And so it takes a lot of guts to not spiritually bypass. Y'all know what spiritual bypassing is? Spiritual bypassing is when we ignore our human responsibility because God will take care of it, or this is what I got in meditation, or the Bible says this, or this says that, and so therefore I don't have to be personally responsible for anything because I can just know that that's the spiritual law, and that's all it is. And that spiritual bypassing is a drug. It's seductive, and the person tries to get themselves. It's an entitlement dance, right? That I don't have to take personal human responsibility for what's going on because God will take care of me. And that's not how it works. You have to put your feet to the ground. That's the deal. So you're the human, you're the hands and feet of God, right? But you also need to do your part, human part, in coordination with the spirit part of you. So when spiritual bypassing happens and somebody just tries to claim that, well, I know the rules, I know, and so therefore I don't have to take personal responsibility, that doesn't work. And a lot of really smart people get caught up in that. And that's an error, I believe. In my world, that would be an error. So it's really about learning ourselves, being open, living in that place of human surrender and spiritual surrender, and seeing how they come together. And there's as many different amazing ways as there are people, but the key and the principles are the same. It's the same principle. So the question becomes then, am I in alignment, really? In any place I'm not, which if we're in human form, there's some place not in alignment. That's the nature. So it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about using that wisdom, and with love and wisdom saying, okay, where am I out of alignment? Or where do I feel a little cattywampus today? Without judging it, without saying there's something wrong, like bad, bad, bad. It's more like, I'm feeling off. You know, like I've been having lots of days where I feel really off and like brain cloud and craziness from this pain I've been going through. It's unbelievable. The mistakes I've made and the not doing the things I would otherwise do. And it causes great pain in addition to the physical pain, right? And so then the lesson is, how do you bring them together in a higher way so that you don't keep going south? And so we all have lessons that show up. So that's where, when we judge ourselves as good or bad or right or wrong or beat ourselves up, that's an ego thing that doesn't work. Right? It's more about share what's going on with another person, talk about it, sort out a better way or a different way to manage it in order to step up to the next level. Remember, we're talking about the steps in order to step up to the next level. That's how come I believe, and I've said this many times, that people in recovery have to use those 12 steps and the principles of those to save their life. So in there is exactly what I'm talking about, how to humanly live the spiritual principles to actually thrive instead of self-destruction. Because when the wounded child and the imagination child are running rampant, that's self-destruction in action. Because the wound wants to keep repeating and growing, because that's all it knows. So we have to introduce something and a process in a way that for the human self to be able to kind of make friends with this part of our lives and then do it. And so all of these principles that we're going over every month, over and over, that's why I give homework, right, is to help all of us kind of keep growing and keep expanding and see what else there is for us to learn and understand and be and experience. Because the moment we think we've got it, we're in trouble. We can understand things, right? We can have great epiphanies and we can have great ways that go together, but we're never done. There's no finish line. So it takes being willing to be in that place of surrender, even when it's hard, and even when it feels antithetical. So can you see how the seductiveness of these two little kids acting out can create a very subtle kind of entitlement that if you let it go on, if you let it keep going in your head, could take you sideways before you even realize what happened to you. And now you're feeling depressed or anxious or not sleeping or stressed out or medicating some way to get it to stop, because you have acting out children who hijacked the bus. And sometimes they hijack the bus in a very quiet, like an odorless smoke kind of way, and you don't really realize it till you're feeling kind of gooky and you go, oh my word, who woke you guys up? Go back to sleep. Right? That's how come this wisdom and discernment and divine love are so important. One of the big reasons. So I wanted to bring that up because all of us are intensely sensitive, visionary, gifted people. And when you're an intensely sensitive, gifted, visionary person, you feel what I'm describing so profoundly that there's probably very little words. And people, you might even think you're crazy, and you might even think somebody else might think you're crazy, but you're not crazy. Especially now in this time and space in human history. Because if you think about it this way, let me just add this little piece. And I was listening to a really cool podcast the other day about it. Maybe I'll send you guys a link. That pre-World War II, pre the nuclear age, none of these things that we talk about were up for topics of discussion. So the way we process the world and look at the world, like our inner spiritual self and the little kids and all that, that's new language, relatively. So we're finding our way this time and space. And the way to find our way is kind of like that old Dove commercial, back to the basics. What's the basics here? What's a basic principle? What's the basic understanding? And then the next question is, how does that look? And how do I use my free will and dominion to bring that into reality in 2021 in my world? But the first step is getting connected to the basic principle. That principle transcends human history. It's everywhere. Like the whole idea of divine love, it's everywhere. It's in all major religions and in places that aren't even considered a religion. How you do it, and what you think it means, and all of those things are then fit into different paradigms. But the whole idea of divine love is not new. How we live it applies to current day. So it's quite possible that because things are changing so fast in the world, right, that you might be one of the people who, by living in a surrendered place of higher principles, start to bring in new ideas to the people around you and into the world to support the coming together of the spiritual and the human reality without spiritually bypassing, but also without throwing it all out. Because there's that big move to pretend like there's nothing spiritual about life, right? We know that's not true. So you just may be part of the solution to say, hey, hold on, there's a different way to live here. Make sense? So I wanted to bring that up today because I think that when it comes to our wisdom and our discernment And it's really great to talk about all of these things. And that's why I give the homework to practice them. It's also important to pay attention to our own personal journey with it all. Because there's a lot to it and there's lots of facets. And everybody's journey is a little bit different because we have different autobiographies, we have different sensitivities, we have different understandings. It doesn't make anybody right or wrong in that sense. The key is, the better question is, are you in integrity? Are you aligned, really? And how much power are you giving the saboteurs, knowingly or unknowingly? And where is your focus and intention to keep expanding? Even when you screw it up, even when you're doing great, even when you're really not thinking about it. Because we all have those lessons. It's not unique. The way we live them is unique, but the lesson's not. Everybody goes through it. Are you with me? Yeah. So what I want us to do this week is really like spend time with ourselves on how am I bringing these things together? How am I bringing the understanding of divine love, like really, with my wisdom, with my ability to discern things? Because discernment is a spiritual principle that we play out. Spiritual information we play out physically, right? And how often are you letting that wounded child in you dictate the show? Oh, I'm afraid, or oh, I can't do it. Screw them, blah, 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 whatever it is. And you guys know, you hear it coming out of your own mouth, you hear it in your own head, and you hear it in other people. Because you think about human history, there's been a lot of wounding going on of all different kinds. Big word now, everybody's using the word trauma now. It'll be something different next week or next month. But there's a lot of that separation, pain, separation from source, separation from the divine. It's been going on for a very long time. And so when we as individual humans become more and more aware of that disconnect, our responsibility is to reconnect so that then our natural light shines to invite others to come down that road with us. Not pushing it on them, but also not hiding it either. So if somebody asks, you answer. But first you have to get connected. Because and so it's a mighty calling. It's a mighty thing that we're doing. Because our presence in any situation changes things. You walk into a room and the energy of the room changes, especially with you guys. Whether you know it or not, whether you're paying attention or not, no matter what, that's what happens. So is it changing for the higher, better consciousness of the world? More in alignment with the higher principles? Or are you bringing in a bunch of fear and distrust and trauma and gookiness? And then that's what's changing the room. And the answer is going to be yes at different times to both of them. That's why it's not about judgment. It's about awareness. It's about being mindful of how you show up. I have a little Post-it note that's usually on this computer, but I left it home since I'm on this trip, and it says, I am mindful of how I show up. So whatever role we're in, we might show up a little differently. If you're the student, you're going to show up in a different place than if you're the teacher, than if you're the expert, than if you're the beginner. And there's no wrong answer, but we want to be mindful about it. So our integrity, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, is intact. And so that's our first job, is to get that alignment happening so we're intact. And there are some days where that flows and is really easy and we're in that natural flow, like Michelle was saying. And then there's other days where it feels like a trick question. That's part of the human experience. That's how come these faculties are so important. Because if we don't have a paradigm, we don't have a way to manage this existence and what to do and understanding, then it makes everything a lot harder and it gets real random and crazy. So there's all kinds of interesting ways to look at it. So next month, we're going to talk about power, spiritual power, stepping into your spiritual authority, which is different. Oh, look, Vince turned upside down. Right? So your spiritual authority, your power, who you're meant to be. That's that free will dominion piece. It's fun. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording and then field questions if you guys have any questions or comments.